Hi, gang. Welcome back to the channel. Look at me doing two YouTube videos, one right after the other. I think I had a stroke. I don't know. Don't get your hopes up. I'm gonna keep trying to do this, but you know me. If you've been here for a while, you know me. Um, Welcome to my third video on the channel. No, I'm close, but no. Had a fantastic weekend of gaming and fun. Um, I do a lot of gaming, mostly tabletop RPG stuff. And there's this one game that I love above all others. It's the Amber Diceless role-playing game. Amber Diceless role-playing game. Get it. Love it. Make a religion out of it. Um, we do this about every 3 months or so. The campaign's been going for several years now. I think we started like 2019, 2020. And we pretty much spend a weekend on a story, and then every 3 months or so we try to pick it up again. So it was just fantastic. I had very dear friends come in to stay for the game and to visit. It was the kids' godparents, and also a very old dear friend of mine, Ryan, who his dad was actually my first like campaign dungeon master. So, and Sunday, my kids came and my grandkids came, and my ex-mother-in-law, who I get along with so much better now that we're not related anymore, came, and it was awesome. It was just heaven. It really was. So great weekend of that. Now it's back to work. Just before I kind of get to the meat of this, um, I am currently grinding away on Golgotha 5, the Hanged Man, and I'm hoping I can get it done by either the end of the year or early next year. Still waiting to make that announcement on these big doings that are happening, but I'm kind of in a holding pattern on that, which is very frustrating. But lawyers, contracts, all that stuff, that's just how that happens. Um, I am working on another piece of short fiction for a Weird West anthology, which Jonathan Mabry is editing. I'm very excited to get to work with him. He is amazing. And fun fact, he gave me a really kind quote on the cover of Six Gun Tarot on my first book. So I'm looking forward to doing that. All right. Finally, finally, I honestly don't know how many years it's been. I'm going to say at least a year. We are wrapping up our discussion on world building. And this last part is really kind of riffing more than anything specific. And it's a little bit of a rant. And I hope you'll forgive me for that. And if you don't agree with me, it's totally okay. I actually encourage that. I'm going to give you one old decrepit man's take on world building and the current state of a lot of intellectual properties that I care about. Take that for what it's worth. To begin with, I want to mention a fellow by the name of Paul Anderson. And here he is, Paul Anderson. There's a good chance you may have read one or more of his books. He was quite a seminal science fiction and fantasy author through the 40s and well into the 2000s. When did he pass away? Yeah, he passed away 2001. And I think he was writing pretty much right up until the end of his life. The man has this amazing bona fides as far as awards and honors. I mean, won the Hugo Award 7 times, John Campbell Award, Locus Award, 41 nominations, 1 win. I've been nominated for the Locus 1 time, and I thought I was gonna float off the planet. Nebula Award 3 times. He was nominated. Basically, was made a science fiction Writers of America Grandmaster in 1997. Was entered into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame in 2000. Just an amazing guy, and he has his critics. Every writer does. I sort of think you need to have those. Keeps you honest, and they're just so much damn fun. But Anderson wrote a lot of stuff. One of the reasons I'm bringing him up, why, you may ask, am I bringing this guy up? Oh, one other thing. He was one of the founders of the SCA. If you're into the Society for Creative Anachronism, Paul Anderson was one of the guys who made that happen, which is pretty fucking cool. The reason I'm bringing him up is Paul Anderson had a series of books. It was a science fiction universe that he developed over numerous books, and I've read several of them. He had one character who was like a merchant prince named Nicholas von Rygen. And this universe, he maintained meticulous notes on planets, on the cultures on the planets, on the politics, on characters, on ships. Basically, he world built. And that's one of the things that he's very well known for, is his world building, because there wasn't a huge amount of it. I mean, you had little islands of it, but a lot of the 40s and 50s science fiction, fantasy were pretty much one-offs. You wrote a book, you had an idea, you produced the world in that book, and then you moved on. Roger Zelazny, the Chronicles of Amber, which that game is based off of. Zelazny was really firing on all cylinders in the 60s and 70s. And he has lapses in his world building, basically, where he would just forget something. So you'd have like these, literally someone walks down the stairs to the dungeon and never comes back, things like that. Or somebody would be dead, then they'd be alive, then they'd be dead again. And, not to fault the man was a fucking genius and an amazing poet, by the way, too. He actually got to start as a poet and then became a prose writer, Zelazny. But Anderson, was well known for having these file cabinets full of all this information on his worlds. He actually wrote a book, which you can find on Amazon. The title of it is eluding me, but let me see if they have it on here. Let me see if they've got it for his bibliography. I don't see it, and I'm not going to dig through it and waste your time on that. But basically, he also wrote a book on building planets. He was also instrumental in a lot of work with NASA. So the guy knew his stuff. He was very prolific, and world building meant a lot to him. It was kind of a foundational thing. He wanted to keep these really meticulous notes and details on the worlds he created. Excuse me. So why am I bringing that up? Because to wrap up our little journey through world building, I'm going to give you my opinion. The series that I write, I work very hard to try to create a world that my readers will be kind of immersed in and will hopefully hold them there. Now, even if your world is meticulously built, you have to populate it with characters that people give a damn about. And you have to populate it with characters that people are going to want to learn more about. You want them to root for them. You want them to get mad at them when they do stupid things. You want that. One of the things that Roger Zelazny, he wrote two Amber series. The first one, Chronicles of Amber. Well, that's all the Chronicles of Amber. Basically, it was first was a 5 book series, then a second 5 book series. The second series was from the point of view of the son of the main character in the first series. And whereas the main character in the first series was this thousands of years old, cynical, nobody's fool, anti-hero, his son was a lot more trusting and much younger, and not the same guy. And to Zelazny's credit, he wrote the character very differently. And you, as a reader, having been immersed in this universe that he had created, were sometimes kind of yelling at the character, going, "What are you doing? Don't tell him that. Don't do that. What are you crazy?" But Zelazny wanted that character to have a different tone and was coming from a different place than his father had come from. So the characters are extremely important, and they're going to be in this playground that's the world you build. So you need both, but they can really complement each other because Zelazny had created this world that you knew so well. It's sort of like, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but it basically, he had created this world you knew so well that you knew what was probably the best course of action for the son to take. But since the son was a different character, he didn't always do that. He didn't do what the reader thought was probably the best course of action. And a lot of times we were rewarded with, yes, it wasn't the best course of action, but live and learn. Or die, and there's no sequel. But it's a little bit like Game of Thrones, which is one of the IPs I wanted to talk about. While I do think it's kind of crazy to say it's been over, I think, 11 years since the last Song of Ice and Fire book came out. And one of the reasons I kind of hated the end of the Game of Thrones TV show was the last few seasons were really not as tight. The characters didn't act like consistently with what they had been like before. The ending was kind of out of like, where the hell did this come from? You had George Martin's world, and he did a really great job of creating this complex, intricate world. And after you read into it a little bit, you were like, wow, you know, and to be honest, I have not read all of Song of Ice and Fire, but I did watch the series, and I have very good friends who have read the books, and we discuss that a lot. But one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is more the concept that the new series, House of the Dragon, which I love, it just wrapped up season 1 not too long ago, and I highly recommend it to you. If you enjoy George Martin's world, if you enjoy the world of Westeros and you enjoy the mythology and the history of that world, I think you'll really be happy with House of the Dragon. Now, that being said, and we'll kind of come back around to this again. They do make changes from the book. And that's something I'm going to mention with a few things here. But House of the Dragon, you're immersed back in that world, and you know what to expect in that world. You know that it's going to be very brutal. It's going to be very unflinching. It is not unicorns and fairies and, you know, enchanted groves. It is pretty harsh, and you know that going in, and that's like a brand. You've come to expect that. So that all being said, I highly recommend House of the Dragon. Now, I have been a fan of science fiction and fantasy books, television, comic books, you know, animation for my whole life. It really did form me into the person I am today. So you know who to blame. One of my earliest memories as a child is sitting on my mother's lap and her reading an Avengers comic to me. Comic books helped me to learn to read. I knew very early on that I wanted to tell stories because of the stories I had seen and read. And that really encouraged me. I think a lot of us can say that. Folks who want to write, it's because we have been exposed to these magnificent stories. And there are worlds that have been built from a story at a time. And that, what is that? There's a little critter flying around behind me. No, that didn't come out of my ear. Just so you know. Anyway, sorry about that. But the thing that has concerned me, and I think it kind of sums up my feelings on world building, is we have a lot of franchises that are pretty beloved and pretty long lived that have kind of disregarded a lot of their world building. Okay, we'll start with a good example. House of the Dragon, from what I understand, changed several things in the book. The book itself is a history of a period about 200 years before the main Song of Ice and Fire storyline. And it deals with the Targaryen and Valyrian families. Those houses, they had dragons, which is pretty freaking awesome in the show. And they ruled over Westeros. They conquered and ruled over Westeros for a long time. And the show departs from the book. However, George Martin, the guy who wrote the books, is right there. That's one of the reasons I think that the first part of Game of Thrones went much better than the last part. Because in the first part, George Martin was much more engaged in it. And they pretty much had Bibles. They had the stories, the books that had come before. So they had those as a blueprint. They had it for a blueprint for how the characters behaved. They had that as a blueprint for how the world was set up. They had that as a blueprint for what the story arcs were. Now, that being said, the show changed things. They tweaked things here and there. Game of Thrones. House of the Dragon does the same thing. Their author is alive, and hopefully he'll stay alive for a long time, and hopefully he'll finish up his work. I really hope so. There's a lot of people out there who would like that to happen. But that gave those adaptations an anchor. It gave them a way to basically stay true to the vision of the story. I don't know what the hell. I think it's a little fly or something, but it keeps on zooming around. Sorry about that. If you want, I can chase it around for a while, and you can just like speed up the video and then come back to me like, now where were we? Bastard. Anyways, so there's a good example. The author was engaged with the adaptation, gave the adaptation his full blessing, and participated in it. When the guys who were show running Game of Thrones ran out of material, and George Martin had not written more stuff for them to crib from, the show's quality started to fail. Get out of here. And when that happened, I'm sorry, this is so stupid. Hey everybody, YouTube, real reality, down in it. Fly, bugging the living fuck out of me. But anyways, what I was trying to get to is George took part in that, and the show shows that the creator had input into it. When the creator was no longer able to give him input, I mean, like, he gave him like some like general ideas about how he wanted it to end, but they were on their own. And that's why you suddenly have Tyrion Lannister go from being this brilliant, sardonic wit to acting kind of foolishly and not sounding anywhere near as smart as he used to sound, because basically you just didn't have the material, you didn't have the world building, you didn't have the construction materials to build your adaptation with, so you had to go your own way. And to be quite honest, the guys who were going their own way weren't up to the job. And I hate to say that, but I feel that way about a lot of current iterations of things I love. I love Star Trek. I love Star Trek. I even was excited and gave a chance to the reboot because I am a realistic person. And Star Trek, 8, Captain Kirk and the crew break out of the nursing home to go have an adventure. Not so much. So I do understand that that they need to recast or they need to go in a different direction, and you can make an argument that they could have gone in a different direction. You could also make an argument that Star Trek is this huge franchise that has gone on and on and on, and if you don't break things up and make them fresh, you're not going to attract new audiences, which I don't know if I do agree with that or not. There's a lot of generational love for some of these shows like Star Trek and Doctor Who that people tend to set their kids down at some point, or the kids just see the parents watching this stuff and go, what is this? And they get into it. Jesus Christ. That fly was sent by J.J. Abrams, I'm pretty sure. He's one of his agents. But anyway, these shows are a lot of times they get generational fans, and that's because the world building is so freaking amazing. It's really good, and it has built this foundation. You build like we've talked about before in previous videos. You build your world a little bit at a time. One of the games that I run, one of the role-playing games I run, is Index Card RPG, and what's really fun about that is the guy in there, his whole idea of world building and running a tabletop role-playing game is very old school. It's very 80s, and it's refreshing because what he's saying is, instead of how many times I've done this, I'll write up a whole idea for a campaign. I'll have this huge elaborate campaign worked out, and I'll have these arcs figured out for the characters. This is how they start, and then they're going to do this, and then they're going to run into this, then they run into the big bad, and then there's many levels or adventures of them trying to reach a point where they can face against the big bad while the big bad keeps on doing things to antagonize them. And almost every time I'd be very proud of myself. I'd pat myself on the back and say, wow, that's going to be a cool fucking game. And we play 3 times because role-playing games are like bands. A role-playing group, it's really hard to get them together. Once you get them together, sometimes you get just fucking magic. But then it's like, well, I got a job I have to work, or I just had a kid, and all that stuff messes with your ability to get together and play on a regular basis. So you put all this mental energy into it, and you got 3 sessions out of it, and you have this huge story arc that will never be known unless you use it. Sometimes I'll use stuff from my games in books, and that's worked out pretty well for me. One of the first short stories I ever wrote, a thing called Hollow Moments, that trying to remember what I got published in Neverland's Library. Hollow Moments came directly from a game that I ran. Well, the germ of the idea, I changed a lot of stuff, but the general idea came from that. But what I'm trying to say is that basically I do understand you need to change up these franchises, especially ones that have been around for 50 or 60 years. However, you could tell, we'll stick with Star Trek for a minute. You can tell that the folks doing it now, I do not believe, have a great deal of respect for what came before them. And that is certainly, a lot of folks didn't like Enterprise, which was a prequel. It was one of the last things they did. I think it was the last thing the old regime of Star Trek did. And that scumbag Les Moonves, in my opinion, he's a scumbag. America, canceled it after 3 seasons because he also didn't know the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek. A lot of folks did not like Enterprise, and to be honest, at the time, I don't think I liked Enterprise that much either. Looking back on it now, it's fucking Shakespeare compared to some of the stuff we've got now. But again, my opinion. If you don't like it, that's okay. I can take it. But even Enterprise, they did try to maintain the continuity. When they broke canon, they would a lot of times go out of their way to throw some kind of an explanation in for why they were breaking canon. I can respect that. Then we get to the newer Trek shows, and I got to be honest, I've given all of them a try. I want to enjoy a Star Trek show. I want Star Trek to continue on into the next century. I want good shows with great writing. That's one of the things that I'm going to harp on here is if you're building a world, you have to be able to build it in a way that it immerses your reader. And you also have to realize that, certain things and how you do them, how you say them, sometimes you just hit a clunker, and and a good script editor or a good editor in general can catch those and do something about it. I don't get the impression that's happening with a lot of the current shows. My latest beef is Strange New Worlds. I actually enjoyed Strange New Worlds more than any of the other current modern iterations of Trek. Anything that's happened since 2009, when they rebooted the show with the first J.J. Abrams movie. I hated the second J.J. Abrams movie, and well, I don't think it was his movie. He had something to do with it, but he was jumping ship to go to Star Wars at that point, which is another beef of mine. If you're going to take on a franchise, stick around. Don't just. I love Brian Fuller's work. I love Hannibal. Hannibal is one of my favorite shows. He jumped Hannibal to go work on Star Trek, and that didn't work out well for him because they screwed him over royally. We can make a claim that they plagiarized a lot of his ideas, but then he was working for him. He was under contract to him, so they used what he gave them. He just didn't get to see it through to the way he actually wanted to. But Brian Fuller, and then he jumped from Star Trek straight to American Gods. And then he jumped American Gods to, I don't know what the fuck he's doing now. But I do think that if you want to have a world that has a sense of continuity in its visuals and in its overall kind of thematic, arcs, you need to have someone who's going to stay around for a while. Some writers I know, like George Martin, he doesn't want anybody touching Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire. He doesn't want anyone touching Westeros after he's gone. And Alan Moore, crazy chaos, no, not chaos wizard. That's Grant Morrison. Alan Moore, ritual magician and full-time curmudgeon, also has pretty much walked away from a lot of his work and just thrown up his hands and said, whatever. I hate everything you're doing with it. But he cashed the checks and he signed the contracts. So, basically, I think that Star Trek, Doctor Who, Rings of Power are the three that jump to mind immediately. A lot of contemporary comic books, I'd say about the last 10 years of comics, from both companies. And comics is sort of a special beast too, because the continuity in comics changes constantly. So it's almost the reverse of what we've been talking about with other world building, because other world building, we're talking about you can build this really fantastic world, but if your characters are shit, no one's going to care. Comic books, the world changes constantly. They have alien invasions, they have supernatural threats, you have Galactus show up to eat the planet. All this stuff happens, and the characters go through all these changes constantly. Costume changes, motivational changes. It happens a lot. What I think you need to kind of hang on to in that ride is what is the core of this character. As much as I hate One More Day, which was a story arc in Spider-Man, where Joe Quesada, the editor-in-chief, decided that Peter Parker had gone from this kind of nebbishy everyman to he's working for Tony Stark. He is married to a supermodel. He just was not the Peter Parker that kind of was the core of the character. One of the reasons Spider-Man and a lot of the Marvel stuff took off so well is because their characters were so different from what other companies, what DC was doing. And One More Day was an attempt to put Peter Parker back to, how do I pay the rent? I got to take care of my Aunt May. Basically put him back to his foundational roots. And many people would say that what followed One More Day was a pretty good run of the character. You do have to change the character around, and different creators are going to have different ways of doing that. Same thing with the shows. Doctor Who's been around for 60 years. There are glaring continuity holes in Doctor Who's universe. There are stories where they change things here, change things there. And a lot of times what they would do is just ignore them. Like when Fox Network did a Doctor Who, Americanized version of Doctor Who in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. It was Paul McGann's Doctor, who was the 8th Doctor. And they fit him into the continuity. They had Sylvester McCoy, who was the 7th Doctor, show up at the beginning of the show. He gets shot in a drive-by in like San Francisco, and he ends up, get out of here, go away, JJ, go away. He ends up regenerating into Paul McGann's character. Paul McGann's character at some point mentions that he was only half Time Lord, that he had a human mother. Now that is completely contradictory to, well, it was something that had never been addressed in all the other incarnations of the show. So it was something new. It was also something that apparently the fans and the kind of the folks who followed hated, so they just ignored it. There's ways you can explain that within the continuity that smooth it out. These older franchises, Star Trek has contradicted itself a whole bunch. First episode, the second pilot, which it was rare that shows got 2 pilots. At the end of it, Kirk is facing an old friend of his who's been turned into this like maniacal demigod, and the guy goes, he waves his hand and he creates a grave with a headstone that says James R. Kirk on it. Which we all know, those of us who have never been with a woman, we all know that James Kirk's middle name is Tiberius, and that it was James T. Kirk. They were writing a second pilot. And what I was talking about with like the index card, kind of building your world, building your world an episode at a time instead of like, most shows have a Bible. They have, I don't even know if they do that anymore. They used to do it. A Bible was like a roadmap for individual episodes to be written. Told you about the characters, gave you their backgrounds and motivations, told you how they interacted, told you how the world worked, how the technology in the world worked, how the magic in the world worked. And this was a thing you built before you started writing episodes. Bible. I would suggest that there were some things in the second pilot of Star Trek that they were still working out. Leonard Nimoy hadn't figured out exactly how he wanted to play the character yet. They had not given him directions to play him cold and emotional, so Spock comes off for the first few episodes as a little devilish and kind of a little sassy Spock. So Doctor Who, in the last iteration of Doctor Who, they threw in a thing called the Timeless Child, which I hate. I absolutely hate. And I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of folks who hate it. The showrunner says he was trying to create more mystery around the character and trying to open up new avenues for storytelling for the character. I don't know if I entirely believe that. And if he was trying to do that, he was just as incompetent at that as he was at being a showrunner for those seasons, because they're horrible. The writing sucks. The stories are just bad. I got no beef with Jodie Whittaker as a doctor. I got no beef with the doctor being a woman. I gotta be honest, I've always thought the Time Lords were, pretty much would have to be kind of trans, because if they can shift between genders, that would not be a big deal to them. It would be like nothing. It'd be like us changing a shirt, it just whatever. But the Timeless Children just completely wrecked and contradicted 60 years of the continuity, and made some really nasty problems that, now Robert Russell T Davies is coming back to showrun Doctor Who, and he might be able to fix that by just ignoring it. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but it's something that drove away the bad writing, started driving away fans, and then that was followed up by this retcon, and I'm really sick of the word retcon. I'm sick of reboots. What basically, like reboots and retcons and all of that stuff. I really think some of these folks need to create original material and leave these things alone. I'm not trying to sound like an old man shouting at the clouds. I'm not trying to sound like someone who doesn't like change. There have been changes. The reboot of Doctor Who was awesome. The original, back in the 2000s, with Christopher Eccleston and Russell T Davies as a showrunner and pretty much head writer, was amazing. And it got a whole new generation of Doctor Who fans going. What they're doing now is not going to do that. The show's ratings are in the tank. The last few seasons have had the worst ratings ever. Like back to when they canceled the show during the Sylvester McCoy run. And I think you can, all of what I'm trying to say here, Star Trek has been struggling. Regardless of what, hey, Star Trek is doing great. Well, how often do you see Star Trek merch? How often do you see Star Trek trending on Twitter? How often do you see, oh my God, did you see what they did in the last episode of Star Trek? And if you do watch these shows, and you've watched them for like a lot of your life, you're like, I love this one. This is one of those shows that's one of my favorites. I don't hear anybody saying that with the new stuff. It's just kind of bland, and it doesn't seem to speak to people the way the original material and many of its iterations did. Look, I didn't like Voyager particularly. I tried. I actually, during the pandemic, I tried to watch it again, and I just don't like the writing. And what's funny is a lot of the writers are the folks who wrote stuff I did like. Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. They did not, I don't know if they were just tired or what, but the characterization, like Captain Janeway was a cool character. She got shitty writing. Literally, she get contradictory scripts. One week she's saying and doing this, and literally the next week she's saying and doing something the exact opposite. It's hard to root for that character. Part of that is the actor has to advocate for the character. And to be honest, in a lot of these new shows, I don't think the actors really give a shit. I don't think they really, doesn't matter to them. It's a paycheck, and it's steady work. They can go to conventions for the rest of their life and sign autographs. They're not, they're not going to fight. Or I don't think my character would do this. I don't think my character would say this. So I think Henry Cavill, who has left The Witcher, I've not read the books, but I'm wanting to very much so. I'm excited to read those, and I'll actually want to play the games. Some of the games are pretty cool. One of the things with Henry Cavill is he was a Witcher geek. He loved the books and the video games, and he wanted to play his character like that. And there was apparently some disagreements and friction over that. And I'm not saying that's why he left the show. I don't know why he left it. I don't think anybody really knows. There's a lot of videos bouncing around saying this is why he left, or this is why they fired him, or whatever. But I don't know. But I do know that, if you're going to do an adaptation of something, The Witcher, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, and Rings of Power, I also, I think, again, I have friends who are hardcore Tolkien fans, and some of my friends love Rings of Power, some don't. The ones I fall more in the don't camp because, um, and this follows for Doctor Who. It falls for everything I'm trying to get to. The thing I'm trying to say with world building here, and why I'm using these examples, is if you are going to produce an adaptation from a world someone has built, you have to like and respect that world. You have to be excited about diving into it. And you have to look at that world and say, there are rules here. The author of this world created these rules, and they may be rules for the characters, they may be rules for the universe and how it works, they may be social rules within the universe. Whatever they are, you have to respect them and you have to honor them, because if you don't, you're not really making an adaptation of a work. You're doing your own thing. If I write a romantic comedy and I slap the word Star Wars on it, and it has nothing to do with any of the previous iterations of Star Wars, that's a problem. You're going to have people come running when you ring the dinner bell of Star Wars, and they're going to be like, what is this? And you do that enough times, you do damage people's love and respect for that property. They'll go back to the old stuff. They'll just go watch the original movies. And then, you know, what's funny is I had a discussion with a friend of mine the other day. So many more people are now like, you know, the prequels weren't that bad after all. You know, Enterprise isn't as bad as I remember it being. New, you know, bad interpretations of something can make bad stuff look better. And I mean, I like look at, you know, Andor, from all accounts. I have not watched Andor, but from all accounts, it is a really good show. But it's getting shitty ratings, and part of the reason why is because so many people who love Star Wars have been burned by some of the properties previous to Andor, and they've just dipped out. I think Star Trek is having the same problem. You've got folks who have just dipped out because I was really excited for Strange New Worlds. I was really excited for it, and like I said, I liked it better than most of the new Trek stuff that I've seen. I haven't really done Lower Decks yet, and I understand that there's a ton of Memba berries in Lower Decks. So I do need to check that out and see if it's actually funny and entertaining. But Strange New Worlds, I was kind of into it, but then they threw in the stuff with the Gorn, and again, this is a deep dive. I apologize if you're here. If you're like, what the fuck does this have to do with writing? Well, stick with me. I'll try to steer the boat back that way. But basically, they introduced, well, they have a race of aliens in Star Trek called the Gorn. They're these lizard men. Captain Kirk ran into them back in the original show and fought one of them in a really cool episode. It's one of those episodes a lot of people really dig. And then back then, the Gorn was a guy in a rubber suit. But even back then, I remember as a kid seeing that and it freaking me out. It's like Doctor Who. A lot of the Doctor Who stuff looks stupid now when you're an adult, but when you're a kid, you're like, oh my God, it's gonna get him. I got a Sleestack shirt that a very dear friend sent me, and I was talking with my kid's godmother this weekend about my Sleestack shirt, and we were talking about how scary the Sleestack were when you were a little kid, and then how when you're older, you're just like, that stupid. They just stood there, went, they didn't even move. They had, 20-foot wide set, and they'd stand by the doorway and go for like 10 minutes. But they were scary. They evoked an emotional response in the viewer. Now, an older person, it might have been humor, but still, basically what I'm trying to get at is, if you build a world, one, if you're going to play in somebody else's world, like I got to play in the Men in Black universe, I got to play in the Star Trek universe. I've written a Star Trek novel, don't I wish, Star Trek short story that appeared in an anthology, and I've written a Men in Black novel based off the last movie, Men in Black International, and I got to add a short story, original short story at the end of it that was set in the universe. So I got to add a little something in the Men in Black universe, and I tried to add something that I thought would be cool, and I tried to respect the stuff that had come before. And the owner of that IP, Sony, were very gracious when I was working with my editor at Titan Books, and we were, and they were trying to tell me, I don't know if Sony will go for this or not. We'll see. Sony likes kind of things to be just like right off the script, and I riffed a little bit. Some of my stuff just got shit canned. They didn't want to do that. Other things I got to slip in, and I'm proud of that. One more example of what I'm trying to say. John Byrne, comic book, Superman. John Byrne was taking over Superman back in the 80s. And there was going to be this huge reboot of the character, which was a big news at the time because Superman was like a holy cow of comic books. And he hadn't really changed much since, the 50s and 60s, they'd done some changes on him. But he'd stayed pretty steady for a while. And some people thought that was boring and he needed fresh blood. So John Byrne came in and basically just like took a wrecking ball to his continuity. A lot of people hated that. A lot of old school fans hated that. I like John Byrne. John Byrne made some changes to the character that have become canonical now. He was the one who invented the version of Lex Luthor, who wasn't some dumpy, bald, mad scientist in a basement. No. He was this multi-billionaire kind of Elon Musk sort of dude who fought Superman with his financial power and his influence instead of putting on like a little powered armored suit and trying to actually duke it out with Superman. And that version of Lex Luthor has survived a long time. And it was because it was good. It was a good addition to the canon. Other things that he changed, people hated, and a lot of those got retconned. And that's kind of the circle of life there. But what I'm trying to get at is when John Byrne did all of this, they had one last issue of the old continuity Superman with all the, Crypto the super dog and Streaky the super cat and Comet the super horse and Bottled City of Candor and, basically all of this stuff that would, a lot of it had not aged well from the 40s and 50s, well, the 50s and 60s. And Alan Moore did the last issue of that before John Byrne took over and changed everything. And Alan Moore did the story with all of the stupid stuff in the continuity. And it was brilliant. And it was good. And he took the stupid stuff and came up with rationalizations for it that made sense. He turned Mr. Mixelplix, who's this little idiot villain, kind of villain, foil that Superman has, this little multi-dimensional imp who wears a little bowler hat and everything, who was just there for comic relief and to make wacky things happen to Superman. He turned him into like this demonic, extra-dimensional thing. He took all of the stuff that had come before him, that other people had sweated over, and that some people loved and some people had memories of that were, good memories. And he respected all of it. He just made it so it made sense in the context of his story. He didn't have to take a wrecking ball to everything to tell a story. That's what I'm really trying to say for all of this stuff. You don't have to wreck what came before you to tell a story. You don't have to wreck what came before you to make it fresh and new. It takes a little thing called talent. It takes a little thing called love and respect. You have to love this thing because it's, look, comic books, Harry Potter, Star Trek, Doctor Who. In the grand scheme of our lives, they're silly little things, but they also give so many people joy. There are so many people who these things have made their lives happier and better. And that's something to respect. Whenever I get someone who reads one of my books and they're like, I really love this part made me cry, or, that means a lot to me. It means I'm doing something right. And I'm getting, again, I can't divulge a lot, but I'm getting ready to do some stuff with one of my series in a different medium. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let it get turned into something that it isn't. That doesn't mean I'm not open to interpretations of it. Doesn't mean I'm not open to new ideas. But everything we do as writers, every world we build has a core. Earth has a core. And that is something that you worked hard on, that you built word for word, chapter for chapter, story for story, book for book. And these people are caretakers of these things. They're not a wrecking crew. They're not here to, they're here to make it better and make it exciting and tell exciting stories. That's what they should be here for, not just to wreck things and break things because they think they are entitled to do that. So as you world build, realize that you need to not only be aware of the kind of world you want to build, the rules you want to have in it. Even if you're going to break those rules, you need to have the rules to know you can break them, and you need to know why you can break that rule. You need to populate them with characters that people care about, and it doesn't mean they have to be all like sweetness and light. I have characters that people hate, but I've also read reviews and talked to people where he said, I hate this character, but I kind of root for him, or I want to know what happens to him. And that's you doing your job the way you're supposed to be doing it. You have to have characters that engage your readers or whatever medium you're in, and you have to have a consistent world that supports them. And that's about all I can think to say about world building. I know I was kind of meandering all over the place. I don't know if I got to everything I wanted to get to be honest with you, but I hope I did. And I really am excited to see what kind of worlds you guys build. One other thing, I think a lot of what's happening right now with intellectual properties is we'll get more asses in seats if it says Star Wars. We'll get more views on our streaming service if it says Lord of the Rings. Make your own things. Build your own universe. It doesn't always have to be somebody else's world that you're playing in. It can be really fun to play. Writing a Star Trek story and having it published is one of the greatest thrills of my life, because Star Trek means a lot to me. And I took things that were mashups from several different iterations of that universe, put them together, but I tried to respect the universe in general. And I think that's really, really important. So whether you're trying to maybe see if you can write some adaptations for some intellectual property, and I've gotten to do a few, and I'm going to get to do a few more, I hope, in the future. And I've had near misses for a couple that I was really excited about, that I hope maybe they'll come back around someday. Basically, it's great and fun to work in someone else's universe. Just learn it and respect it before you start changing it. And then try to keep in mind that you're a caretaker of that it's not yours. It's something someone has entrusted you with. And as far as your own worlds, go fucking nuts. Can't wait to see what you guys build with that. And I hope that this long ass, massive delays between videos, little discussion we've had about world building has maybe been a little bit of a help. Maybe it's giving you some good ideas. Maybe you have some questions that I haven't answered. Please ask them in the comments. And of course, you can always find me on social media, Patreon, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Reach out to me, and you can always tell me about the worlds you're building. I'm excited to hear about that. And you can always ask me any questions. And I don't pretend to be an expert in anything. Clearly, if you watch these for a while, you know I'm not an expert in anything. But I will give you an honest answer, and if I can't answer it for you, I'll find someone who can give you an answer. So that all being said, go build some worlds. I'm looking forward to it. I will see you guys on the next one, which we'll have hopefully next week. I've got a few weeks of just grinding and working, and no events or anything until Turkey Day. And I hope you guys are having a wonderful November so far. The day I'm doing this is Election Day. Get out and vote. I don't give a fuck who you vote for, but vote. You know, people died for that. So, okay, enough of that. Where'd that soapbox come from? Oh my God. Take care, guys. Tell me what kind of worlds you're building. Ask me any questions you want to ask in the comments, or seek me out, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.